Number 4.
Now, I was just in my squad car with my female partner, Taylor. We received a domestic disturbance call, and the dispatcher said that there were probably some kids messing around our town's abandoned hospital, and someone called because they saw lights coming from the hospital. So, my partner and I were arriving to the location when we saw some lights in some of the rooms and some shadows in the rooms. We enter the hospital, and we find that there's graffiti everywhere and broken glass all over the ground. When we get inside, we call out to anyone.
"Police, please, come out."
We hear no response though, and the place is very unnervingly quiet. We start our search and find that some people must have lived there at some point but vacated a long time ago. We continue our search up to the second floor, and that's where it got weird. We smelt some sort of horrible smell at this point, and we were very on edge about the whole thing. We start our search on the second floor and find broken beer bottles and cans. We're almost done when we hear a kid start to cry, and we call out again,
"It's the police, please, come out."
Again, no answer. But now, my partner and I know someone is here. So, we start to search where we thought the cry came from, and we enter some of the rooms and find that they're empty. We enter another room and see that there's someone behind a blue kind of see-through curtain thing. I call out,
"I see you. Come out of the curtain."
I move closer and pull back the curtain, and there's no one there. And the shadow behind the curtain, it just dissipated, like there was no one there. I blew it off and said that it must have just been the way the light was hitting the curtain or something. I continue my search, and after sweeping the whole hospital twice, my partner and I head out, and on the stairs we can see directly to the end of the hall where the main door is, and I see someone standing in front of the main door. I tell him,
"Police, put your hands up and get on your knees."
The man doesn't seem to care. I can't see what he looks like, all I see is a shadow. I turn on my flashlight and he runs off into the room on the right. I run after him and tell him to
"Stop running! Stop, now!"
He doesn't comply, and I follow him through the room. He runs to the back of the hospital and out a back door into some woods. I chase him for some time in the woods with my partner, and I ended up losing him. I called dispatch, and they sent 3 others. They help us look for about 45 minutes, sweeping the path we went looking for him, and we came up with nothing. We go back to the hospital, and it's not long before we find what the smell is. It's coming from one of the maintenance closets. We find a dead cat with burned out candles all around it. It looked like a satanic ritual or something. It was pretty bad. My partner saw it and she had to head outside. She just couldn't stomach it. The cat, it looked like it was cut open in a surgical fashion, and its blood was everywhere, including in the shape of a pentagram with some sort of non-human skull in the middle. It was a bloody mess, and I hope to never see something like that again. As for the guy, he was never caught, and I never found the crying kid I heard when I was on the second floor. But since that night, I have had some things happen to me in my house. Other than the nightmares that are very vivid, other things that I can't explain have happened. I've heard kids in my house crying. I've heard knocks at night on my walls, and the occasional shadow in my hallway and room at night. Taylor hasn't had anything like this happen, but she has nightmares like mine, and has had one encounter with a shadow figure in her basement steps, but she's never seen anything else. Unfortunately, I have more stories, but this will have to do for now.
Number 3.
So, my partner and I, Beth, we went to investigate a home that a girl had called from but hung up after stating her name and address. It was just the 2 of us, and we were prepared for what sounded like maybe someone had broken into our house and she had to stay quiet or something like that. We arrived in a not so good part of town at a large 2-story greenhouse that looked like it had been built in the 1960s. It had a really creepy atmosphere about it, and it kind of sent chills down my spine. Myself and Beth approached the front door and peered inside, and from where the door was angled, we couldn't see anybody. We knocked on the front door a few times, and an elderly woman came up and unlocked the door. She asked us what we needed, and we told her about the girl who had called from this home. She looked at us all confused and said that no one lived here but herself. We looked at each other and nodded. Just to be safe, we asked to have a chance to look around the house in case she was lying. She just sighed and motioned us inside. We entered the house and looked around. After some time looking, I got a call from the police station and they reported that the girl had called once again, and this time she said that she was hiding. I shuddered at the message and went back inside and told Beth about the call. We then proceeded to move upstairs and I was met with a giggling of a girl, I think. I asked her if there was anyone up there and I was given a reply rather quickly. From my left there was a closed door and I heard a girl say,
"I'm in here."
I got serious chills and started wondering if this was some kind of messed up prank, to which I was very displeased with and would have to arrest the woman for. I pushed open the door and there was no one in there. I checked the closet, under the bed, behind a bookshelf, but nothing. I was really freaked out by this, but I decided it had been some kind of prank and I stormed downstairs, and as I made my way downstairs, I got another notice from the police station. Again, the girl had called in, but this time she told the police that she wasn't there anymore. Now I just wanted to get out of there. I told the woman what I had experienced upstairs and she just laughed. I looked at her, confused, and then she proceeded with,
"Oh, I'm sorry. That must have been Emily. She's such a silly thing. Always making prank calls. She's such a humorous girl."
Frustrated now, I asked her why she told us that she lived alone then. She smiled wider.
"Well, I do live alone. It's just me in this house."
I looked at Beth and she just stared at me, bewildered. I thanked the woman and exited the house with Beth. We didn't talk on the way back and we haven't talked about the job since. It was really weird and it still gives me chills just thinking about it. I don't know if I was going crazy or if the lady was, and I don't know if it was just some sort of stupid prank they did really well. All I know is that I probably never will know what happened at that house.
Number 2.
A few years back, my partner and I, Deborah, got a call to investigate an abandoned building that someone said they saw a person walking around in through the windows. Since it was seemingly falling apart, it would be wise to make the person exit for safety reasons. Now, I'm not usually scared easily because of past calls where I had to risk my life to catch criminals, but I'll be honest and say that my first glimpse at the building, it gave me chills and made my gut hurt. I just shook the feeling away though, and myself and Deborah proceeded to walk in and start searching the place for the person that was seen. The building was about 4 stories high, so we had to make sure to check every level. While searching the first floor, when Deborah was searching the second, I started to hear footsteps coming up from behind me. At first, I assumed it was Deborah, but then it occurred to me that I hadn't heard her come down the steps, so I turned around expecting to see the person we were looking for, but there was no one. I shined my flashlight around, but there was no one in sight. I got really creeped out, but I ignored it and continued searching. I entered one of the rooms that wasn't that big, and seeing no one there, I turned around to go back out. But as soon as I pointed my lights toward the door, I saw somebody walk by the door. This startled me, and I froze in fear, but ran to see who had walked past the door. Again though, there was no one there. At this point, I was getting scared, and I decided to go upstairs to catch up with Deborah. When I reached the top of the stairs, I caught a glimpse of Deborah shining her light around a room. I ran over to her and told her what happened. She seemed to get mad at me and asked me why I hadn't caught him or her, and right when I was about to answer, we both heard footsteps on the 3rd floor above us. Deborah sighed and carefully walked up the stairs to confront the person. I slowly followed her, and midway on the stairs, after she had turned a corner, a figure stepped in front of the top of the stairs and just stared at me. This made me freeze in fear, and I couldn't bring myself to shine my flashlight on them. He stared at me for what seemed like hours, then giggled, and then walked to where Deborah had went. At that moment, I ran up the stairs and went in the same direction, and after a few minutes of running around, I finally found Deborah. I asked her if she knew someone was following her, and she looked at me, confused. I told her what I saw, and I could tell that this made her nervous. She looked around nervously and made a fake laugh. She said,
"Okay, I feel like we're a part of a dumb prank here or something.
I nodded, and we decided to proceed back down to the first floor and to try to think of what to do next. We were down in one room for about 20 to 30 minutes before we heard footsteps in the other room. On instinct, I put my hand on my taser just in case this person wanted to hurt us, and the footsteps stopped. After waiting another 10 minutes, nothing happened. Deborah and I ran out the front door. We took a minute to calm ourselves down, and we went to the houses down the street and looked for the person who called us. We found him, and we asked him if he was sure he knew what he saw. He broke down and told us that he and his friend Ethan wanted to play a prank on us and that he had lied about seeing someone up there. When he told us that, I could feel my face go white. I looked over at Deborah, and she looked white too. That night, we had to arrest a boy, and I never went near that building again. I don't know if there was actually someone in there with us, or if I had just witnessed something completely paranormal.
Number 1.
For 5 years, I was the only 911 dispatcher in a region of remote Alaska, which was roughly the size of the state of Oregon. I was employed by the biggest town on the Delta, called a city by its 6,000 residents, but our dispatch office was also responsible for answering any emergency calls in the area once the Alaska State Trooper post in town closed for the night. As unusual as a 911 office is under normal conditions, 911 in Bush, Alaska beats it all. However, the incident I'm about to share was not sparked by one of these calls, but by a strange visitor. The dispatch office in which I worked was directly behind the public lobby at the police station. We had a large bulletproof window in the wall, through which we would communicate with the members of the public who came in for assistance, to pay fines or request reports, etc. This particular night was a deadly slow blizzardy shift, with sideways blowing snow, wind chills down to minus 45 degrees Fahrenheit, and literally nothing happening. As was usual, I was on shift with 2 officers, and the 3 of us basically dedicated the night to getting caught up on paperwork. By 1 AM, I had finished all the routine tasks that I could think of, and was just settling down to a rousing remainder of the shift completing crossword puzzles, playing Spider Solitaire, and being ready to answer a phone that had not rung for hours. Fortunately, we had a chief of police that only required us to be on station and awake. Once our paperwork was done, we were free to do whatever we needed to do in order to occupy us until the next call came in. We could not leave 911 unattended, and the officers were always willing to sit in while we hurried across the hall to the bathroom or outside for a few moments. I buzzed down to the squad room and asked if someone could come up and cover for me. Sergeant A agreed happily, and I soon heard her footsteps coming up the long connecting hallway. She popped her head in the back door, and I went out the front, opened the door to the lobby, and grabbed my coat and went outside. It was bitter, but invigorating, and I lit a cigarette, prepared to shiver it out. We always left the connecting doors open, so I could run back and take over any incoming calls. The station was built on stilts to keep it off from the permafrost, so the front door was either reached by a flight of 10 metal steps to the right of the door, or a disabled access ramp to the left. There was a landing connecting the ramp and the steps, and the main front door opened off of this. I had gone down the ramp a little way to get out from under the roof and to try and get a better look at the sky. Suddenly, I heard Sergeant A give a little gasp and call my name. I went back up the ramp to the door and called in, not wanting to crush my butt unless I needed to. She came to the lobby door, asking if I'd been standing on the landing just now. I told her no, I was down the ramp. She told me that she had glanced up to the monitor that showed the view from the front door security camera, and that there was someone standing at the door, peering into the lobby. This person was shorter than I, which is unusual since I'm only 5'2". The person was much thinner and wearing a jacket with a hood up over their head. I don't own any coats like this.
It wasn't me, and there's no one out there except me,
I assured her. We both shook our heads. I finished my smoke and we went back into the office. She was showing me where she had been standing when she looked at the monitor and pointed up at it.
There, just like that.
I looked up and, sure enough, there it was. A short, thin figure in a hoodie, staring into the lobby from outside of the front door. Sergeant A ran out of the office, threw open the lobby door and ran across to the front door. On the security camera, I could see the figure until the moment Sergeant A's back intervened. Of course, there was no one on the landing when she opened the outer door. She stepped out, looked all around, bent over to inspect the snow by the door, then came back inside, puzzled. I watched the monitor closely, but nothing appeared at the front door. Sergeant A closed the door to the lobby, returned to the dispatch office, and the two of us just stood staring at the monitor for a long time. And nothing.
"Did you hear any cars?"
I asked.
"No,"
she said, trailing off as she seemed to catch my meaning.
"Hang on."
She bolted down the long hall to the squad room, then out the squad door to her unit. She radioed in as though it was just the beginning of a patrol round, and I responded likewise. She drove up and down the street in front of the station, around the station, on the back streets near the station, through the parking lots for at least 5 blocks in every direction, and never made a flicker on the monitor. No vehicle lights could have caused that figure to appear just there. She finished her patrol and came back to the station. She left her unit parked outside the front door, where it formed a better backdrop for the security camera. Not 5 minutes after she stamped in, the figure, it was back, staring into the lobby yet again. I hollered for her, and both officers came running up the hallway. The other officer ran into dispatch, where he could see the figure for a few seconds before Sergeant A's back obliterated the sight. But again, no one was there, and no footprints in the snow. But 3 of us, 2 cops and a dispatch supervisor, had definitely seen this thing. None of us spook easily. I mean, we couldn't do these jobs for very long if we did, but we were spooked that night. Officer C soon went back to his desk, but Sergeant A and I took turns staring at the monitor, and opening and closing doors, windows, turning lights and computer screens, anything that might resembly explain what 3 sober adults had clearly seen. But nothing made the figure appear again. Finally exhausting all possible experiments, we shrugged and each went back to our desks. I kept glancing at the monitor, but no hooded figure, not for an hour or so. I took one call from someone who complained they had paid a bootlegger $70 for a bottle of whiskey and never got the bottle. This was a standard call, and it happened 7 or 8 times a month. The town I was in was known as moist, meaning adults could airship in 15 pints of hard liquor a month, but selling liquor in town was against the law. Of course, this worked as well as prohibition ever did, meaning not at all. I patiently explained that buying booze in town was a crime and that police could not help citizens commit a crime. The caller was not willing to press charges. I mean, they never were, and I learned not to bother asking. As I was going through this, I glanced up at the monitor, and I saw the figure again. This time, it was leaning toward the door with hands seemingly cupped to either side of its face, the way you do to reduce the glare in a bright window. I told the caller that I would not be sending a cop and hung up on the furious cursing this answer always triggered, and I hollered for Sergeant A. I heard the footsteps coming up the hallway again, but this time, slowly. I heard them, and then nothing. I moved back to where I could look down the hallway. It was empty. There was nowhere for anyone to go in that hallway, unless they went out of the squad door, and that hadn't happened. Then, Sergeant A appeared at the far end, in the squad room, and called out to me.
"Hey C, B said you hollered. It was back, but it's gone again."
She came up the hallway, and I realized that the first footsteps, the ones that stopped, were too light and shuffled too much to be the sergeant's. I told her about those footsteps, and she caught and held my gaze for a long minute. This really unnerved me. Cops looking that way can do that, even when you work right beside them.
"Have you heard these before?"
There was a note in her voice that made me realize that something serious was happening here.
"I have, but always on windy, blowy nights. I just figured that something in this old rotten building was banging around and getting ready to fall off or something. Of course, that wasn't what my trainer had told me."
The sergeant, who had been hired after my trainer left, had not heard the story, so I filled her in.
"Apparently, the holding cells in the first police station, the older part, were back where the squad room is now. Once they built the jail, they pulled out the cells and made it into your office, but for a long time, prisoners were held back there. Some of them died back there too. Drunks aspirating their own vomit, internal injuries that went unreported until someone passed out or began bleeding from an orifice or another, and, quite probably, some cowboy cop who went off on some frequent flyer once too many times upside the head. Anyway, there were deaths in the building. Right after the cells were removed, people alone in the front of the building would hear those quiet, shuffling footsteps coming up the hallway, stopping at the water cooler, and when the person looked down the hallway, there was nothing there. My trainer told me that he had heard them some dozen times, always on midnight shifts, always when he was alone up here, and always exactly the same. And you've heard them before?
It wasn't a question.
I have. How many times I told myself it's the pipes or the wind or the bloody permafrost creeping up the floors, I don't know, but I heard it.
She visibly relaxed.
Thank you. Covering for you the other night, I heard them. You were out front and C was on the street and those footsteps came right up to the cooler. I thought I was losing my mind. C's been here longer than either of us. Let's ask him. No. This isn't the kind of thing you ask about. Not another cop, especially one that might feel obligated to write it up on his daily report or something.
I understood this. Many nights I had seen and heard cops going on about the daily report and what would be in it, what would or should be left out, and this was the kind of thing a cop like C would feel obligated to report. He was one of those by-the-book kinds.
But he did see it earlier, when you both came up. He stopped and watched the monitor while you went out. I asked him back in the squad room and he said he didn't get a good look at anything before I blocked the camera.
We both knew that would be his official position, and that we were wasting our time trying to get confirmation from him. She stayed around dispatch for a while, bringing her paperwork up to work at the spare desk, which had the best view of the security monitor. I busied myself with crossword puzzles, glancing up from time to time. The door locked normal each time I raised my eyes. Suddenly, Sergeant A threw down her papers and snorted,
I can't stand this. Drunks with guns I can handle. Ghosts in the window? I can't handle this.
She had just finished this sentence when the footsteps came up the hallway again. We shot to the office door and watched an empty hallway remain empty.
And that's shit. Fuck this.
She unhooked the pepper canister from her belt, aimed it down the hallway and let loose a burst. I winced and drew back. Pepper spray was a constant around here, as officers frequently tested their cans, came back to the station reeking of blowback spray, or just messed around with it, spraying each other's coffee cups or dinners. The stinging and burning odour drifted into the office, and I waved papers at it as my eyes filled and watered. I stumbled over to the windows and threw them wide open, letting in lots of 45-degree wind and snow. But it cleared the pepper spray, and I stood there a moment, breathing real air. Suddenly, I caught sight of a cop car the sergeant had left out front. There were handprints on the rear window, just where they would have been if an officer had positioned someone there to pat them down. I showed them to Sergeant A, who just stared, and then called for Officer C, who came up. He stared at the handprints for a moment, then turned away from the window with a shrug.
Someone looking to see you if you were in the car?
He muttered.
Someone? Out there? On a night like this?
She asked, frustration and disbelief in her voice. I dug out the spare camera that was kept charging in the dispatch office and handed it to her.
Pics?
I suggested. She nodded and headed out to the car. I saw the flash reflecting from the snowflakes as she shot frame after frame. Officer C watched her the whole time, not saying a word. I turned to him and asked,
When you saw that guy at the door in the monitor, was he wearing gloves? Could he have even left those handprints?
Officer C shook his head.
Didn't see anyone out there.
Then, in an almost inaudible voice, he added,
I never see anyone out there.
He turned and left dispatch. Sergeant A came through with the camera, indicated that she was going to process the pics, and went down the hallway. More time passed without incident. Then, Sergeant A brought me the camera and showed me 2 pictures of the handprints. At least they were real enough to show up on the film, unlike everything else that was happening. I was just about to say this when the 911 screen lit up with its usual blaring siren, and I was taking the report of a fire downtown. Normal routine kicked in, normal for emergency services anyway, and I soon had cops on the way, the firefighters out of bed and into their rigs, and answered the other 22 callers that all thought that they were the only one to see the fire. Prints, footsteps and visitors were completely forgotten about, until I got to work the following night and found a note from the chief. He asked me to hang around and see him after my shift ended the following morning. Nothing out of the ordinary, this happened every so often. But when I went into his office, I saw the handprint photos on the desk right away. He asked me directly what I had seen and heard 2 nights before. I told him and added the other occurrences and the stories that B had told me. The chief sighed and leaned back into his chair.
I figured it was that again. Every so often, these things happen around here. Everyone is driven around, trying to make the headlights show on the monitor. People have set tripwires in the hallway. This was the first time anyone pepper sprayed that ghost, though.
His voice trailed off.
Let's hope it's the last then, hey?
I tried a small bit of humour. Bad idea.
It would not be a good idea for the citizens to know that their police station has undocumented residents,
he sharply said. I nodded quickly. Working for the police was uncomfortable enough way out there, where cops were frequently seen as the enemy. I didn't need my boss on my back.
They'll never hear it from me,
I said, and meant it. That is, until I sat down to type this report. That was over 10 years ago, and 4,000 miles away. Late night musings frequently take me back there, and it leaves me wondering just how many times that station has been visited by hooded figures that leave handprints and walk with shuffled feet. G'day mates, it's B-Buster here. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video guys, and police remind me to never join the force. I know, they're getting worse, I'm sorry. Thanks again to the Hive members that bravely shared their stories for us all here, and I hope you guys are all doing really well. For the chance to have your story feature in a video, you can send your story to my email, which is in the description below. And as always, keep them coming guys, as this channel relies upon your stories to continue. Also, please do me a favour and just state in your email what your story is about in the description, and also provide me with a short written statement of consent just so that I can be above board with everything. Also remember to tell me in your email if you would like to remain anonymous, and please change any names if you don't want particular names to be shared. So as promised guys, the creepypasta from the last video was in fact the Deep Web story, which many of you guys actually guessed correctly in the straw poll I put in the comments and in the description. In fact, the poll stated almost 80% of you guys guessed correctly, so well done, and I guess I'm going to have to lift my game a little bit. As always, it would be awesome if you could like, share, comment, and subscribe if you're new. Don't forget to follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for updates throughout the week. You can also catch me on my second gaming channel, all of which have links in the description below. Thanks again for tuning in guys, and I'll see you mates in the next one.